Basic Brewing Radio listeners, have you registered for HomebrewCon? Now's the time. The National Homebrewers Conference is the homebrew event of the year, packing a ton of fun and learning into 3 unforgettable days. This June, join thousands of your homebrew comrades in Baltimore's beautiful and historic Inner Harbor. Register now at homebrewcon.org. Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, April 7th, 2016. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. This week, 2 experiments from the Brulosophy team. The first based on whether doing a Vorlauf makes a difference in your beer. The second on whether sparging with room temperature water is a good idea. Steve and I will put them to the taste in our taste test. If you're new to home brewing or would like to get into the hobby, check out our website, basicbrewing.com, where you can find archives of our audio and video podcasts and our DVDs to walk you through basic and more advanced brewing techniques. And if you buy any of our DVD combos, you get a free Basic Brewing bottle opener. And don't forget to get a copy of our Brewer's Logbook. While you're at it, you can use it to log and track up to 50 batches of beer. You can follow me on Twitter. My username is Basic Brewing, all one word. We also have a Basic Brewing Radio and Basic Brewing video page on Facebook at facebook.com/basicbrewing. Thanks again to everyone clicking on the Amazon.com associate link on our basicbrewing.com site. Whenever you think of Amazon shopping, think of us first. Go to basicbrewing.com, click on our associate link. It won't cost you any extra, and you'll be helping us to bring you the show, and we greatly appreciate your support. We also have associate links for Brew Your Own magazine and the American Homebrewers Association on our site as well. You can find our Basic Brewing iPhone app on iTunes, our Android app on Amazon.com. We have a Windows Phone app. We're on the BlackBerry podcast directory, and we're on the Stitcher app as well. If you want to put a tip in our tip jar, some coinage in our guitar case, you can go to basicbrewing.com/support, and thanks to everybody who's done so already. And if you do, I'll send you links to bonus content that we've made over the past 3 years. We've got time to jump into the mailbag a bit. This comes from Jason, who saw Steve make vermouth out of some homemade wine in a recent Basic Brewing video episode. Jason asks, does the homebrew vermouth go off like wine does in a couple days? How long can I expect it to last? Well, I sent the letter to Steve, and he said I would treat it as any other white wine. The more you can protect it from oxidation, the better and longer it will keep. I store my opened bottles in the refrigerator with a vacuum seal stopper. I've had an open bottle of vermouth from the show in the fridge for about a month, and I can't tell that it has lost or gained any flavors. I do think in general the quicker you use it, as with any wine, the better. All the more reason to enjoy martinis early and often, I say. Sage advice from Steve Wilkes. Our friend Scott Kaway up in Detroit wrote after hearing the Common Sense Brewing panel. Scott says, what makes my brew day faster and more productive is that I almost always use the second runnings for something. I'll brew a lighter beer or add some dark grain and make a porter. Even with 2 mash tuns, I'll mix the second runnings of both to make some sort of beer. This doesn't shorten my brew day much, if at all, but I end up with extra beer from it. So the big plus for me is that I plan on a big first beer, so I get my everyday beer as an extra. Scott also says, I also do a lot of cleaning in the gaps. I'm assuming that that's in the time gaps and in the gaps in between equipment. Mind the gap. Even after imbibing more than I probably should, I have built into my routine that everything is cleaned up by the time I go to bed. The exception is cleaning out the mash tun. I have people who want it for compost, so I save it for them. This has been sometimes a problem since they don't always seem to be in a rush. This has been a block in brewing since cleaning out at a later date is less fun. See, that's like what I said in the panel. Scott says, my big savings have been not worrying about everything but sanitation. So that is good advice as well. Don't shortcut on your sanitization. Then there's this from Dennis. Quick question about the Belle Saison yeast that you've been using lately. I find this an interesting yeast, but I can't seem to get it to finish down in an expected range. I've done 2 farmhouse ales with this yeast. Both were around 1054 to 1058. I rehydrated for both batches. Both got off to very vigorous starts and stayed active for 4 to 5 days. Temperatures were around 66 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit. After 3 weeks in primary, it was at 1022 and 1024. I was expecting this to go below 1012. Any thoughts here? Have you experienced this? And I answered to Dennis that I hadn't had a problem with the Belle Saison yeast not attenuating properly. And I asked him if it maybe had something to do with his grain bill. Maybe he had, a bunch of rye or something in there. Well, Dennis answered back after figuring out the problem himself. He said, actually, the answer is fairly simple. Ignorance. I did not realize a refractometer cannot read the final gravity directly. Once I plugged the numbers into Beersmith conversion, I found I hit my final gravity nearly spot on. Well, there you go. You can't use a refractometer to measure final gravity accurately unless you use a calculator to compensate for the effect of alcohol on the measurement. And it's something for me to remember when answering a similar email in the future. I always forget. I've come across that 2 or 3 times where people say, my beers aren't finishing. And I should automatically say, are you using a refractometer instead of a hydrometer to measure your final gravity? If you do, find a calculator online to correct, or Beersmith or your software. Also, Sean Terrell has a calculator on his site as well, SeanTerrell.com. Now a word from our sponsors, Desiree and Dave from High Gravity in Tulsa. If you listen to this show, you know that Steve recently received the 120-volt version of their electric brew-in-a-bag system. Well, he finally got a chance to brew on that system, and he shot some video for an upcoming Basic Brewing video episode. He brewed what Steve is calling an extra special or strong bitter with Maris Otter, Victory, a bit of wheat, Fuggles, East Kent Goldings, and Chinook hops. I think he used Safale SO4 to ferment. I'm sure it will be tasty. Steve says the brew went very well on that new system. He brewed outside on his back deck, and the video shows the boil, and it is a very nice rolling boil. Steve's system has 2,250 watts, according to Dave at High Gravity. Mine is a bit bigger capacity system with 4,500 watts. Woohoo! Both have the EBC SV controller. I think I called it the EVC controller last time. Both have that controller and a pump to recirculate the wort and monitor the temperature and change it as well. You can check out a video that Steve and I did to find out all the details of the differences between Steve's system and my system. You can find that at youtube.com/high-gravity-brew. Take a look at that. Even if you aren't looking for a system, we got kind of goofy as usual, so it might be fun. It's not very long, and it's fun to watch. And there's good information in there as well. You can also go to high-gravity-brew.com to read up and compare on all the different electric systems that High Gravity offers. So high-gravity-brew.com or youtube.com/high-gravity-brew. And thanks to Desiree and Dave for their continued support. One more question from the mailbag. John says, I strictly batch sparge and skip the Vorlauf step. In its place, I clip a paint strainer bag onto the end of my tube that drains into the boil kettle. I get a surprisingly small amount of particulate matter in the bag, which makes me think I could even stop using this bag, which I won't. My question is, do you see any issues with this method? Well, John, your timing is very good. You might find your answer, at least a clue to it, right here. Well, Ray Found, welcome to Basic Brewing Radio.
Well, thank you, James.
You were, the third member of the Brulosophy team to come on the show. You guys are taking over the homebrew universe.
Well, yeah, I think you've had Marshall on and Malcolm have both been on. That makes 3 out of the 5 of us now, and calling the team just us 5 is a little more complicated now because Marshall just did a collaboration with House of Pendragon up there in Fresno as well, so we're doing a little bit of outside collaboration as well besides just just the five of us, but here I am.
And we're glad to have you. You sent us two experiments. One has already been published,
Yep.
and I'm not sure when the second one's going to be published, but I'll be posting this tomorrow. We're talking on Tuesday, and I'll be posting this show tomorrow, so to be timely. But the first experiment we're going to talk about is an experiment involving Vienna style of beer. So give us the parameters of what we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, so ever since I started brewing, I've heard about, the Vorlaufing process, right? Recirculating the sweet wort over the mash to try and, clarify the sweet wort, to try and, reduce potentially some off flavors in the beer, make the beer clearer, the final product. All sorts of different reasons given for it. And we wanted to put that to the test. A few weeks prior to me doing this, Matt Waldron, one of our other contributors, did sort of a similar one where he did just a straight, Vorlaufed one and didn't Vorlauf the other, and didn't really get much of a result. Didn't get any significant results there. So as we sometimes do, try and test this kind of to the extreme. So for me on this, instead of doing a Vorlauf versus no Vorlauf, I kind of did an intentionally terrible job on one of them to get basically far more grain husk material than you'd ever expect into one of the boils.
So how did you intentionally do something bad?
Well, so I'm set up at home to brew either 10-gallon batches or 5-gallon batches. For this one, I did it actually like a single 10-gallon batch collected into one big kettle, and then I have another kettle that's identical. So I kind of mix it to make sure it's homogeneous, and then gravity transfer between the two kettles before the boil starts, so that I get equal volumes of identical wort. And then for the really badly Vorlaufed one, I had strained during my normal Vorlauf procedure. I had strained out just about 20 grams of material in that process, to get a kind of a measurement. So then we basically added about 200 grams of material to one of the 5-gallon now boils.
So what is this material you're talking about? The actual husks?
It's spent grain. Yeah, I just took a big scoop out of the mash tun after it was emptied.
So what is your setup? Do you have a false bottom, or what do you have in your mash tun?
Yeah, I have two Chapman Thermobarrel. They're an insulated stainless mash tun with a false bottom in them. They're a 15-gallon nominal 15-gallon capacity, perfect for about 10-gallon batches. But then, I collected that off like it was a single 10-gallon batch and then split it into two kettles before I started the boil.
So you're actually getting husk material in the Vorlauf, before the wort clears?
Yeah, exactly. So while I usually run off, I use a pitcher off of a KitchenAid stand mixer. It's got a nice sturdy handle on it. And I run off about 3 of those pitchers. Ends up being about 1.5 gallons of total liquor. And rather than just running it off and pouring it back on top of the mash, this time I ran it through a fine mesh screen so I could measure how much was actually being recirculated back on top.
That's interesting. I have back in the days when I used my mash tun, before my brew in the bag period now, I had the mesh hose, for the hose braid, essentially from a toilet hose, and that was good enough. I hardly ever got any husk material in mine. And then in brew in a bag, I think the mesh bag is so fine that I hardly ever see any actual husk material in the wort. Now, the wort isn't clear by any means because it's, you don't, with brew in a bag, the Vorlauf is not as effective. Plus, I squeeze the heck out of my bag at the end of the mash. So, I'm just curious, what do you think about that?
Yeah, when I had a toilet screen, which I had in a cooler mash tun for several years, I think it works just dandy, all the same. I always got a little bit of particulate matter in that first runnings in mine. But not when I've used a mash in a bag as well. In fact, that's what I used to strain through for this, to kind of measure how much was getting filtered out by the grain. But 20 grams of material actually isn't a huge amount of wet grain material, but it was. I do get quite a bit on a false bottom, and I think most people do on the initial pull off of a false bottom. There's usually a bit of grain that works its way down under the false bottom,
right?
When you stir up the mash and things like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's essentially just putting some spent grains in one of the boils, and both were treated identically, I take it, and other than that, and then you sent it to off to sensory, essentially.
Yeah, so we did exactly that. Boils were exactly the same, and then I start drinking the beer quite a bit sooner before the tasting panels do. And part of that is because I need to know that it's the beer is ready per se, or anything like that. That it's clear, that it's bright, that the yeast has dropped out, that it's nicely carbonated and even and everything like that. And when I took the first sip of the one with the spent grain in it, I hated that beer. I thought it was disgusting. I thought it was bad. I couldn't even really put my finger on it. What the character or the taste was that I didn't like, but it was really, I found quite unpleasant. And then I went out of town for work for a while, and I came back and I poured the two side by side again. And while I personally still detected a little bit of a difference, it wasn't. I liked both of them. I liked both of them later on. So after 2 or 3 weeks in the keg, most, I would say, of the difference in character was gone, had lagered out, if you will, and that's when I kind of went to sensory with it.
Interesting. Now, you sent us bottles of both of these experiments. You sent 2 sets of the amber experiment, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, and 1 set of the Vienna, and 1 bottle broke. Now, it could have, one of the duplicate sets could have broken, but no. One of the Vienna broke. Luckily for us, it was one of the duplicate of the 3. So we had the 2 different beers. The green bottle was destroyed, and it was the same as either the blue or the red. So we actually had 2 different beers. We had a blue one and a red one. Both of them were different beers in this experiment. So we didn't get to do the triangle test, but Steve Wilkes and I did get to sit down and taste, compare the 2 blind. We didn't know which was which, but the blue sample against the red sample. And here's how that went. We used to have Vienna sausages when I was a kid. Did you?
Yeah.
Did you say Vienna?
No, I said Vienna.
You were fancy.
The very first thing I ever bought at a PX after I was allowed to buy something from basic training was a Vienna sausage. Can of Vienna sausage.
Now you just said Vienna there.
Well, I was making fun of you.
Oh. Thanks a lot. I used to like those things when I was a kid. Now, and here a couple of years ago, or more recently, I bought some, and they're horrible.
Oh, they're disgusting.
They're just the nastiest, horriblest thing in the world. Who came up with those? They're disgusting.
Yeah.
Anyway, this beer is not disgusting.
No.
We had a leg up on this one. The gods and the UPS smiled upon us and destroyed one of the duplicates. It destroyed the green one, which was the same as one of the other two. So we wound up with red and blue, which are different.
Right.
So we got a leg up. So the experiment is to essentially test Vorlaufing, as I understand. One was boiled with spent grains in the kettle, and the other not. What's your impression, sir?
I think that this is what I think. I think the blue one did not have the boiled the spent grains that were boiled. I think the red one did. I think the red one is a little bigger beer. It's a little more. It does have a kind of tannic bite to it. The blue beer is a little softer, a little rounder. I perceive it as being a little thinner. So I actually prefer the one that I perceive to have a little more of a tannic bite, because it seems like it has a little more body to me.
Interesting. So yeah, I think we agree. We're going down together.
Yeah.
That the red one was the one boiled with the grains, and it is markedly more astringent to me.
Yeah.
And I think, doggone it, I think we could have gotten this one.
Finally.
If that green bottle hadn't broken, I think we could have nailed this one.
Yeah.
Because to me, the difference between these two is pretty stark.
Yeah, it's pretty easy to figure this one out, as far as there is a definite difference between the two.
Now, I preferred the blue, because in this style, I enjoy the malt, and the blue one really is malty, and there's a tiny bit of caramely flavors in there, and it's not roasty, but it's kind of round and flavorful, and the red one to me is just that astringency. It's kind of like too strong tea. It's to me, that's an off flavor in this style. So we differ there.
And I agree with what you're saying. My palate, I just prefer the one that's a little, I don't know, got an extra shake of pepper in it, I guess. And maybe tomorrow I wouldn't feel that way.
Yeah.
We were talking off mic a little bit ago about how some days you prefer things that are hoppier or more tannic. Like red wines can be very soft or very tannic, and that's one reason why you blend red wines a lot, because you want to soften those tannins, say in a Cabernet Sauvignon. To me, this is kind of the same exercise. I do like the blue one, though.
Yeah, well, I would drink a full pint of both.
Oh yeah,
either and both.
Either and. And I don't brew to style anyway. I brew art.
10 minutes.
Just 10 minutes of art.
10 minutes of art. 10 minutes of pleasure. Art.
This is my love life. I'll be back in 10 minutes.
So, Ray, we're putting our reputation on the line again. We think that the blue had no spent grains and the red had the spent grains in it. How did we do?
You got it right.
Yahoo!
And I should say it wasn't on purpose that you only. My intention was actually to send you 6 bottles of each, but the keg containing the blue beer, in this instance, the clean beer, if you will, or the no grain added beer, that keg kicked on me actually right as I was filling the second set of bottles. So I actually had a couple bottles at home of the other two, to drink in the garage or what have you. I figured there was no sense sending you extras of those.
Well, that's the way it goes, That's the way my week has been. But But I think, as I said to Steve, I think that we could have gotten this one. I think we perceive the differences between the two, and maybe we were just fooling ourselves. But to us, the difference between the two was fairly, if not obvious, it was noticeable. Did you get the same results from your triangle tests with your participants?
We were actually one person shy of that. So we couldn't establish with a p-value better than 0.05 that it was significant. But 11 out of 23 panelists did identify the correct beer, which equates to a p-value of about 0.10. So this is really kind of, where p-values can be a little misleading. P of 0.10 doesn't mean, well, this didn't matter per se. It just means that, based on the criteria we set up ahead of time for where we're going to draw the line, it didn't reach that. It didn't reach that point.
Interesting.
That being said, I personally, especially kind of after, learning what this beer tasted like in an amplified sort of sense early on, I maintained my ability to tell the two apart. Blind, unblind, triangle, side by side didn't really matter for me. So personally, I found it fairly. I don't want to say obvious, because I think the difference did get muted as time went on. And I will say you were dealt an incredibly fortunate hand on that, in that you knew going into that test that the two were in fact different.
Right. We cheated a little. Nature cheated us.
Yeah.
UPS cheated in our favor.
So it's, I don't know what we can draw from this, because, even at sort of an extreme mishandling of the sweet wort, we didn't get an extreme difference in taste. Now, you guys talked about, astringency or tannins. I don't know if I've ever really experienced enough of that in beer, to know what that flavor really tastes like in beer, because I didn't personally perceive it as tannic. I just thought it tasted kind of weird. I had some other people tell me they just thought, and kind of like Steve, that it tasted sort of maltier or bigger, more flavorful, in a sense. I think was how Steve described it there.
Right. Did you get a sense on which one was preferred?
I think it kind of came down to what styles of beer people liked. So it seemed like some people liked the one with the grain added because it was richer, bolder, had more character. Others, like myself, in fact, kind of the opposite. I think because, at least personally, I like beer, cleaner, crisper, drier. Yeah, so it did kind of lead me to a interesting hypothesis I've got, kind of going on decoction. Decoction's one of those experiments we kind of keep putting off, because none of us really wants to do it. Because there's this debate over, how much difference does a decoction mash make? Obviously in a decoction you're boiling grains. On the other hand, you've also got, most of us at Brulosophy, we're doing, rapid or quick lager techniques, where we're raising the fermentation of lagers, basically up to ale temps during the ferment, at least in the later portions of the fermentation, and turning around lagers in, in 2.5 weeks, pretty routinely. I've got a little bit of a hypothesis going that if there's a character from a decoction, there might be something to the traditional extended lager period to drop out some of maybe the unpleasant character that at least I noticed in the boiled grain that might drop out over time and leave, perhaps a nice element of a decocted mash. I'm not sure.
Huh. It's an interesting question. I don't know how you would construct an experiment.
Neither do I, and it's total conjecture. It's total conjecture at this point. It's just kind of an idea that this one has kind of left me with. And most of these experiments do that, leave me with more questions than answers per se. So.
Welcome to science.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go on to the second experiment, and I'm clueless on this one, and the recording may reinforce that perception. But this one was based on an amber beer. So what was this one about?
This was an American amber style, kind of a West Coast amber. And I was testing basically the temperature of sparge liquor. So I'd heard from some people who, for one reason or another, within their process, it's easier or faster or less hassle to just sparge with room temperature water rather than preheating sparge water in there. So that's what this was. This was just sparge water at 75 degrees sitting in my garage versus sparge water at 175 degrees that I'd heated in one of the kettles.
And 75 degrees Fahrenheit is around 24 C, and 170 is around 76 or so.
As a dual citizen Canadian American, I appreciate that. I wasn't going to do it, and I don't know if you're right or wrong.
Well, I'm looking at my little scale here I have on the from John from Adelaide gave me years ago.
Okay.
So wow, yeah, sure, it'd be quicker to sparge with room temperature water because you don't have to heat it up, and I imagine it'd be less expensive as well because you're not burning fuel to do that.
Well, incidentally, not in my process, because I heat my sparge water during the mash, so that's downtime anyway.
Mm-hmm.
This is one where I never really understood the rationale on it, at least not on my system. Other people have different equipment, different brewing methods, and all that. Because for me, it actually made the brew day longer on that because the sweet wort that ended up in the kettle was colder and took longer to come back up to a boil. So from a time management standpoint, hot sparge water is better because it makes your wort hotter and get up to a boil.
Yeah, you're right. Now that I think about it, I mean, like I say, it's been a long time since I've brewed a traditional, either fly sparge or batch. So yeah, I would always heat my sparge water during the mash as well. So yeah, and your point well taken. I mean, if you got hotter sparge water, you're finished. The wort that goes in the kettle is going to be hotter. So and as far as the fuel is concerned, you're going to have to use the same amount of BTUs, I'm assuming, to take that volume of water up to boiling temperature, whether you do it in stages or not.
Yeah, I mean, you could probably get into the nitty gritty and try and figure out which one, on an absolute sense, was more efficient. But from a heating standpoint, I think it's the differences in the weeds.
I mean, you're going to lose. I mean, if you don't hit 170 degrees, right at the end of your mash, or right when you're ready to use the sparge water, you're going to lose some temperature there. And if you pour, say, in a batch sparge, pour your water into the mash tun, it's going to lose some heat going into there. So I mean, there's maybe some little differences, but in the general scheme of things. So how did you structure this experiment?
Yeah, so this was one where I basically did it just as two 5.5 gallon batches. So I have two of those mash tuns I talked about earlier. So I did two identical mashes side by side, and just ran each batch. I offset by about 20 minutes. Start one about 20 minutes after the other, and then I just brewed two batches at once, and they finish 20, or in this case about 30 or 35 minutes apart, because they did get further apart because of that heating time in between. I should add, for those curious, I do a batch sparge system in my home brewery. I have tried fly sparging; it works just fine as well. But this test was done batch sparged.
So did you see any difference in yield or efficiency going into the kettle?
Yes, actually, I was the original gravities ended up about 0.02 different, and that was actually after doing a little boiling the cold sparged beer a little bit harder. I kind of kept my foot on the gas a little harder with that one to try and catch up, because the pre-boil gravity was about 4 points low. But they did end up within 0.02 of each other for the original gravity, and then fermentation-wise, I think they finished at the same. Yeah,
but
finished at the same.
Taking into account original or volumes going into the fermenter and gravities going into the fermenter, the colder water was a little bit less efficient.
Yeah, not hugely so, but definitely about 2.5% less efficient. On my system, and I didn't have great efficiency this day anyway, but I do believe all the volumes of water and everything used were all identical, so I do believe this was a real function of the variable. My system's much better at brewing 10-gallon batches than 5-gallon batches from a brewhouse efficiency standpoint.
So did you perceive any differences between the two through the process, or any sensory of you as the brewer before you gave the final product to other people?
From the day I brewed this, I have not been able to tell a difference between them. I drank some again last night. I personally perceive them as completely identical. I can't, even knowing which one is which one has higher gravity, any of that, I cannot distinguish between the two of them.
Well, that makes me feel a little better.
Yeah.
Should we go into our tasting now?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so Steve and I, we actually are playing these out of order, so if there's any discrepancy in what we say or whatever, that's why. But here's Steve and me tasting the amber experiment. Steve Wilkes, welcome back to Studio A.
Thanks, James.
Here we have another difficult Brulosophy experiment. We have the red, we have the blue, and we had the green, and it's an amber ale experiment. So what did you think?
I thought it was, the beers are nice. So the beers are well made, and they all three taste very good, and they all three taste very, very similar. So I'm not sure which one they added the 3 molecules of SOTS to, but this was a pick out the different beer.
One was brewed with 1,147 grains of 2-row. The other 1,146.
That's right. Yes.
Which one?
It's the red one.
We both picked the red one as the odd one out.
Yeah.
And then we were just asked, did you compare red to blue?
It didn't ask me to do that. My question was, which one is different
Right.
between red, green, and blue.
Right.
I said red.
Right.
Then the next menu said, which one did you prefer, red, green, or blue? All the same, no difference.
Oh.
I preferred red.
Huh. Mine asked me to compare red to blue.
And you picked red as
As which one I preferred.
So we should have. See, I don't know
how. So we're probably wrong.
Yeah, that's going to be my guess.
They just sent us on wrong things. Well, they were all very similar. I thought that red was a little more bitter.
That's so crazy, because I thought it was less bitter. This is turning into like a Miller Lite commercial.
We don't know what
we don't know what we're doing. I thought red was softer and a little less aggressive in the hopping. And the hopping and the making and just
and the hopping and the smoking and the
That's right. That's crazy. I expected you to say the same thing. That is just nuts.
Well,
but again, it's because the difference is very, very light, not Miller Lite.
Right. It is. They're very similar.
Yes,
as David Letterman would say. So I don't know. Either we're right or we're wrong. I think it was a stab in the. In my opinion, the differences were not that pronounced.
No.
And as happens, I go up this direction down the set of cups, and I feel one way, and then I take a break, and I go in the middle, and then outward, and I feel another way, and then I go from right to left, and I feel it. So it's very, very, very close.
Well, but here's the thing: they are very close. But maybe that's the point. Maybe the Brulosopher folks have taken a technique that everyone has told us we must do, because if you don't do it, the beer will just be awful.
Right.
And they did it, and then they did it the way they told us it would be awful, and we can't tell the difference.
Right.
Now, I'm making that up.
That's what's happened a lot.
Yeah, but that could be the thing. And, we've done the same thing with, like, the hot side aeration and all kinds of things that we've done over the years. But so it could be that not being able to tell the difference is the right answer.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, James.
So, okay, Steve and I picked the red one as being different, but but I said it was a tiny bit more bitter, and he said it was less bitter. So we don't have a lot of confidence in our pick.
Yeah, I think you guys. I think you guys were well off, kind of hedging like that. No, the red beer was one of the identical beers. I think red and blue in this case was identical. Interestingly, last night I had my wife do the triangle test. She usually does quite well on them. She likes beer as well, and she tasted one. She liked one of them in the triangle test and didn't like the one she chose. Now, she actually got it right and was quite certain that she did not like the green beer in this case. And then I handed her two, because I was sampling them side by side in just normal pint glasses, and I said, "Oh, okay. Well, which one of these two did you like?" And she switched her mind on it. So, your mind can play tricks, I think, is one of the lessons that we get from these.
Yeah, that's why marketing works.
That's right.
Advertisers rely on that we convince ourselves of things.
Now, one of the things I would share, if it makes you and Steve feel any better,
yes, please,
is one of the things that's important to know is that we're not testing you. The tasting panel, the people, you and Steve, you guys are not being tested. You're the way I like to put it is you guys are just the tool.
It's not the first time someone's called me that.
Yeah, you guys are the instrument of measurement, or in aggregate at least. the tasting panel is the instrument, instrument of measuring the beer.
Sure.
That we're using. So I try and get that across to all of my tasters, especially the ones who get it wrong. That they're not being tested here.
Yeah, but it's always fun to be right.
It sure is.
So was the green one? I guess it doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter which one was which, or which, if the green one was the cold or the hot or whatever.
I believe green was the normal, like the hot sparge water, the normal processed beer.
So how'd the rest of the participants do?
About the same. I've had 17 so far. I may get a couple more if I can get to 20. By the end of the week, so to speak, I will. But I'm not gonna work really, really hard at it because I have another beer I need to get triangle tastings done on. And we're at 7 out of 17 have got it right, which is not anywhere near significance. In fact, you can see that that's quite close to chance odds.
Interesting. So when should we see the write-up on this?
That's going to be up to Marshall, editor-in-chief. Because we're going to be on air here, we'll probably push it. It's mostly done anyway, so we may push it ahead and get it out there sooner than later.
Well, we'll go with the Marshall Plan, as it were.
That's right.
See if there are any history buffs out there. Well, interesting. I guess it just depends on your workflow and your preference, then, according to this experiment, whether your sparge water is hot or not. I expected a bigger percentage difference in efficiency because the theory is that hot water makes the sugars more soluble and, rinses them out of the grain better, right?
That's certainly the theory, and I don't have any reason to doubt it per se. But yeah, it wasn't a huge difference in efficiency. At that point, too, I got to think a lot of the sugars that are left in the grain are already dissolved, so to speak. They're just dissolved into the water that is absorbed into what's left, and then we're by sparging, we're diluting that out, to try and recapture those sugars so they don't, most of them don't stay trapped in the, in the grain material. But just like you with squeezing your grain bag, are doing, doing it a different way.
Mm-hmm. No, I can tell one advantage that, especially for batch sparging, one advantage to using room temperature water to sparge is the safety factor. If you have to climb up on a step stool with a kettle full of sparge water and it's 170 degrees Fahrenheit or 76 C, then that's dangerous.
Well, or even quite frankly, now that you mention it, even just if you're brewing in a bag and you are squeezing that grain bag, just lifting it out, just from a comfort standpoint, when I did mash in a bag, that was always one thing I didn't really love was dealing with that hot grain bag. When I was finished with the mash and sparge on this, the cooler beer I think was down like below body temperature. Was like in the 90s. Or high 30s for our north of the border friends. So yeah, that I hadn't really thought about it until you mentioned it, but that certainly would be a potential advantage.
So there you go. So you may be sacrificing just a little bit, a tiny bit of efficiency, but adding a tiny bit more grain or, boiling for just a little bit longer to get a little bit, smaller volume will catch you up on that.
That's right. Or, I could see if you were a person who was, blessed with really good tap water that you were using unadjusted, so to speak. You could switch from batch sparging with hot water to fly sparging, straight out of the tap, so to speak, not bothering with a pump or anything else.
You'd want to filter it, get the chlorine out, but
just running it through a filter and then straight into the mash with tap water, temperature water, and I could see reasons why this could work in somebody's system. It doesn't for mine. My tap water is quite bad, so I have to treat. I use reverse osmosis and build up mineral content from there, and but I could see how this could be, an advantageous technique for some people.
Yeah. It's worth a shot. I mean, if you're, so to speak, it's worth a Marshall shot. Sponsored by, no. I don't know. I was in a car wreck yesterday. I'm still giddy.
Yeah.
But, it's surprising. Another surprising result from the team at Brulosophy.com. Very interesting. So keep keep the spent grains out of your boil, Alton Brown, and and pay less attention to your sparge water temperature.
That's right. Or just keep doing what you're doing and don't listen to us. That's fine too.
Yeah, if you're happy, and you know what. Forget all of this stuff. All right, Ray. Well, this has been fun, and I hope to talk to you again. Are you going to Baltimore?
Probably not. I was going to try and swing it, but I now have a couple of expectant mothers in the family that I'm going to have to be making some trips to visit and things later in the summer. So I don't know that I'm going to get the time. Of course, I should have made the effort last year in San Diego, and it was only 70 miles from my house. But
I have a feeling it'll be back on the West Coast before too long. I have no inside information, but that's just the way it goes. All right, Ray. I appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, James.
Well, thanks again to Ray. Both very fun and interesting experiments. And I was listening to Steve and me, and we always joke around a bunch when we do these tastings. And I got a comment on YouTube a while back in one of our mixed drink episodes that complained that Steve and I joke around too much. Well, maybe we do. What do you think? Do we joke around too much? Too much chatter? I know we sometimes get a little carried away with our silly banter, but I think it's fun, and I hope that you do too. It's why I enjoy getting together with Steve. Otherwise, it's just a couple of middle-aged guys sipping and talking about beer. So, anyway, drop me a line. Let me know what you think. Also, if you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or am I being paranoid? Everybody says it. Or just want to say, hey, write to james@basicbrewing.com or just fill out the contact form at basicbrewing.com. And please don't forget to tell us where you're from. Nobody ever tells me where they're from anymore. Check out our support link where you can throw a couple of bucks into the tip jar by subscribing financially to our podcast. Be sure to check out our DVDs, Extract Brewing and Partial Mashing, Stepping into All Grain, Low-Tech Lagering and Decoction Mashing, and Introduction to Wine Kits. You can find them all on our site. You can get a free Basic Brewing bottle opener with any DVD combo. You can check out our Basic Brewing shirts in the store as well. You can find our log books where you can track and log up to 50 batches of beer. Check all of those out at basicbrewingshop.com. Thanks to everybody who's continued to click on our Amazon.com link. We appreciate the support there. Our featured products this week that were purchased through the link are 3 Sheets to the Wind, One Man's Quest for the Meaning of Beer, and Fitbit Charge Wireless Activity Wristband. Thanks again, everybody. And remember, I can't tell who bought what, so no worries there. Just click on the Amazon.com logo on our site the next time you feel like Amazon shopping, and we greatly appreciate your support. And don't forget, you can also join the American Homebrewers Association and subscribe to Brew Your Own magazine as well through our associate links on basicbrewing.com. That's all until next time. Until then, thanks for listening, everybody. Might get back to New Zealand stuff next week. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by Kelly Dodson. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time, everybody. So long.